Hi, I'm Kalahasi. Tokiponisation, the process of converting proper names to fit tokiponophone tactics, is often treated as a basic skill. It's explained fairly briefly in Poo, and a longer explanation can be found on Llanelli's page. But the guidelines aren't trying to cover every possible circumstance. Instead, they leave a lot up to the user. For instance, do front-rounded vowels retain their frontness or their roundedness? What about back unrounded vowels? Does the dental fricative stay dental or fricative? What about the lateral fricative? You get the point. So this made me want to find out what people actually do when faced with options like these, and I put together a survey. I selected 10 relatively obscure place names that have something interesting going for them, and recorded a local, or at least a native speaker, saying these words, and asked people to adapt them. Oh, and Wasukeli suggested not showing the spellings. Seeing the spelling exposed to us can lead to bias, often in trivial ways that appear as beginner follies, but also in subtler ways, such as nudging us to choose the more familiar spelling options out of multiple equally valid ones. So avoiding the spelling and making it a purely auditory experiment definitely made it more fun. So now let's take a look and listen to each of these places. Let's start with the only Malili, not Maotomo, on this list, the state of
Rakhine.
This clip was taken from a news report.
Rakhine dedaga nemre amnya prago.
The state of Rakhine is a de jure subdivision of Myanmar and de facto one of several battlefields in the ongoing Myanmar civil war. The name Rakhine is interesting for several reasons. In particular, it's very compatible with English. Arakanese is one of those languages that have a r, which became y in Burmese, by the way, which is why Myanmar is actually spelled Myanmar. Also, the k is aspirated like in English, and both languages have an I diphthong. And I realize this is irrelevant in a poll that doesn't show spelling, but Rakhine is even spelled by drawing on the orthography of English with the post-great vowel shift approach to writing the diphthong. All in all, a pretty cool word. There are 28 unique ways that people have adapted this word, of which Lakan and Wakan are the most popular options. Even put together, however, they make up less than 50% of all responses. So instead of looking at the list, let's break up the word into smaller segments and examine how different people adapted those. Do people loan a non-English r as w? Turns out kinda, but not quite. The L option comes out ahead, 47 to 39. Only one person went with y, which is a notable choice, as previously mentioned it would be closer to how Rakhine is pronounced in Burmese. And what happens to the coda in ein? 56 people chose to drop the y and keep the un. 14 people chose to break the diphthong into two vowels. I was particularly intrigued by an option only 6 people chose, which is to metathesize the y and turn it into a vowel, resulting in ani. I personally went with wakan there, but in hindsight, I really like the sound of lakani. For a second entry, let's go to Europe and listen to the town of
Gyöngyös.
This clip was also taken from a news report.
Arról, hogy átvállalja Gyöngyös adósságállományának.
This is the town of Gyöngyös in Hungary, not too far from Budapest. The name of the town contains front-rounded vowels as well as parallel stops. In my mind, this meant we're choosing between tente, tonto, kenke, and konko. Boy, was I wrong! Put together, those 4 options make up just 8 out of 108 responses. The first consonant is fairly evenly split between k, as I anticipated, and slightly surprisingly y. In hindsight, it makes sense. Going from y to y can be done in one step, so to say, by lenition, whereas y to t or k requires both a place of articulation and a voiceless change. The second time the consonant appears, however, people are a lot more decisively in favor of k over y. Perhaps the consonant cluster makes the difference. Maybe n already provides the voiceless, making it more important to preserve the obstruents, which makes k the better option. The vowels are equally as interesting. In the first syllable, 70 people preferred I and only 10 people preferred O. If we're to assume this pattern holds for words with front-rounded vowels, this is a lot more decisive than I expected. Or perhaps the palatal consonants made us biased towards the front vowel. More research is needed as always. The vowel in the second syllable is a lot more varied, but this is not unexpected. After all, Hungarian has word initial stress, making the quality of the second vowel a lot more murky. Not to mention, is already fairly close in vowel space to schwa. Still, is slightly ahead at 29 responses over or, which is at second place with 19. The sh sound at the end of the word is also notable, as 48 people preferred to drop it, while 37 kept it. The most popular epenthetic vowel is E, which makes sense knowing that sh is alveolo-palatal, but the other four vowels can also be found. Having looked at a place in Asia and Europe, let's now move on to Africa and the town of
Ndjolé.
This is taken from an interview in Gabon.
Ndjolé, ville cosmopolite de la province du Moyen-Ogooué, au centre du Gabon, change de visage.
The reason I included this town's name is pretty simple. I wanted to know what happens to the word initial Nj cluster. Turns out the community is undecided. 54 out of 91 people went with dropping the N, while the rest preserved it with an epenthetic vowel. Of those, 21 people chose to insert a vowel in between the consonants, while 13 added it at the beginning of the word, like in Spanish or Farsi. 55 people also agreed J should go to S, though T and Y were surprisingly more common than I expected. But the truly unexpected shake-up was the vowels. While the vowels are close mid in the interviewee's original French, half the respondents actually chose to group them with close vowels rather than mid. This goes against my intuition that Tokipona mid vowels include everything from close mid to open mid, while close vowels only start beyond that. This insight makes me suspect that we should start writing Tokipona and or as open mid vowels in transcription instead. But, as usual, we can't say for sure until someone else does a more thorough experiment. Next, let's visit Wales with its wonderful lateral fricatives as represented by the town of
Llanelli.
This audio is from some kind of BBC documentary.
A summer of violence and loss of life in the town of Llanelli. It's my hometown.
This one turned out to be fairly straightforward. People vastly prefer to group lateral fricatives with S rather than with L, although this pattern is more pronounced word initially rather than word internally. Interestingly, the stressed open mid E in the second syllable is also split between E and A, so who knows, perhaps what happened with Ndjolé wasn't so unusual. Onwards to rural America, where we find the town of
Weirton.
as pronounced in this news report.
Reporting in Weirton, I'm Jake McGlumphy, working for you.
Although the town has a fairly uninteresting phonemic transcription, the phonetics shows us a glottal stop followed by a syllabic nasal. A familiar experience for English speakers, yet somewhat of a challenge to adapt sensibly. Yet the results are pretty much what you'd expect from the phonemic analysis. 60 people were perfectly happy to tokiponize the glottal stop as T, with the second most popular option being L. If instead you assumed all glottal sounds disappear, you might come to the conclusion that this should have a W or a Y, yet only 6 people chose this logic. The vowels continue to be somewhat insightful too. The vowel in the first syllable belongs to the neolexical set, and though 55 people predictably chose E as the closest match, 24 people went with A instead, and a couple people even broke the diphthong into 2 syllables. The second vowel technically doesn't exist in this word, but almost everyone chose to interpret the syllabic nasal as having one, and it shows a distribution like the one we've come to expect from a schwa. Interestingly, though perhaps not unexpectedly, the schwa also prefers non-high vowels. Next up is the city of Perm. I don't have a video to show for this one, as the entire context was me pronouncing the name of the place I grew up in. The name isn't particularly interesting, though I guess locals pronounce it with more palatalization than other Russian speakers. Something that surprised me is that 33 respondents out of 91 didn't pick up on the word initial P sound. I guess P when pronounced without aspiration may be confused for a T, or the lack of a consonant. Sure, I guess? Berlin was decisively the average choice, though as always only a quarter entered that specific strain. Most people had some deviation from it. I, for one, chose Bemi, as I felt the labial place of M is worth preserving. It was interesting to be a clear minority when naming my home city. At 1 million people, Perm is one of the largest cities on the list, but not as large as the Iranian city of
Isfahan.
as pronounced by this guy.
آسیا هم است. اصفهان در 2 نوبت پایتخت ایران بوده.
I mostly wanted to see what people will do with her in the middle of a word, but it turns out the syllable structure itself proved challenging. It's got a consonant cluster, sv, though pronounced more like sv, that could be resolved by consonant deletion, or insertion of a vowel, or 2 different metatheses. Because of that, my usual segment diagram is somewhat unable to cover exactly what segment is supposed to map to where, but I will do my best to explain the logic. Word initially, though zero onset is expectedly the most common option, 29 people chose to add a P. This may be another phantom plosive caused by poor audio quality, such as what happened to Perm, or maybe this is meant to be metathesis of f. In the second syllable, though dropping s is technically an option to resolve the consonant cluster, 80 people out of 90 chose to keep it. Instead, the f is either deleted or moved to the next syllable where h would have been. Other than w, we see people using y, which is a valid insertable consonant, and k, which is probably from people treating the glottal fricative as a velar one. The vowels are fairly intuitive. In the second and third syllables, they're somewhere between a and o. The first vowel is nearly unanimously accepted to be I, which is quite funny, as the English spelling often prefers the more Arabic-looking spelling with the word initial I, Isfahan. If you base your adaptation just on the spelling, it seems quite likely you'd reach a different conclusion here. Next up, we've got some back unrounded vowels,
증평군
which comes from this news report.
증평입니다. 증평군 광덕리에 약 4만 평.
This is Jeungpyeong County in South Korea. I was trying to get a town here and instead landed on a county by mistake, but in a place as densely populated as South Korea, I hope I can be excused. Anyway, what I expected to see was that the 2 back vowels create a similar effect as I wanted in Gyöngyös, having at least 2 toki-pona vowels be decent matches. And yet, no, none of that. In fact, this might be the lowest amount of disagreement we've seen in the survey so far. Sinson is the most popular option, with only the third consonant being particularly controversial. That makes sense to me. The aspiration followed immediately by y can sound a bit like a palatal fricative. The somewhat popular k and t options are likely just an artifact of audio quality. The second to last place brings us to the not quite beaches of Normandy, where we find the city of
Rouen.
This particular inclusion doesn't really serve a purpose. I just thought the way French people pronounce Rouen is funny and somewhat hard to tokiponize. But I didn't expect how hard this would turn out to be. Like, okay, the average segment-wise option is Kuo, which is not allowed because of Wuoyiti, which is also why Kuwa is relatively popular. But what is going on with the rest of the chart? Roughly a third of respondents heard some sort of port syllable at the beginning of the recording, which I have absolutely no explanation for. I can't hear it no matter how much I listen back. You may also notice the last column is titled H, which shouldn't be in the word Rouen, but it's an audio quality issue. The recording of the word is immediately followed by breathing in, which tripped off a couple people into thinking this is another syllable. The nasality on the second vowel of the word, interestingly enough, survived more often in between vowels, as an epenthetic n, rather than at the end of the word, as is the case in the spelling. A plurality of respondents chose k for r, but other options are surprisingly common, and I can't explain why. Overall, definitely a weird one. But nothing can outweird the word I left for last. Behold, home to almost 3 million people, the city of... In case you're confused, here it is again. And as you can see from this news report, it is not sped up. This is the capital city of the state of Kerala in the south of India, Thiruvananthapuram, literally the city of Lord Anantha. The Brits anglicised the city to Trivandrum, and that remained its official name until 1991. And I'll be honest, I only included it on the survey because I couldn't stop giggling at the idea of forcing people to transcribe this mess. There is hypothetically 7 syllables in half a second here. Now, how did my poor respondents handle this? Well, most respondents thought there's somewhere between 4 and 5 syllables in this word, which is better than the Brits at 3, but short of the actual 7. Because syllable count is so varied, I can't actually make a good mapping between real segments and submitted ones. But suffice to say there's plenty of k, t, n and non-high vowels. And to make things worse, out of 81 responses, 77 were completely unique. Here are a few examples. Telen tatalen, kulin teweten, keten tuten, tepeten tuputum, tane tamen, kerpin yininum, didedobide, and kiete santakalo. So what I've learned from this word is that Malayalam speakers have magic powers that allow them to speak at least twice as fast as I can, and that it's a lot of fun to make tokiponists suffer. Great! Okay, to sum up, I think this was a very fun experiment. Presenting place names without spelling hasn't been done that much in the Tokipona community before, and I think we should keep trying. What I've also learned is that sometimes it makes sense to use y for palatal stops, that both and prefer becoming front unrounded vowels, and that lateral fricatives are a lot more fricative-y than they are laterally, and that a fair few people will choose to break uoiti if the only thing they can clearly hear is uo, and that if a word has the same sound twice, there's no guarantee that it'll be adapted the same way both times, and that the only time people will agree on a vowel is when I expect them to disagree on the vowel, and vice versa, and that sometimes people will just add a syllable into existence that wasn't in the recording. Audio is weird. I've been Kalasi, and I'll see you around.